Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So before we get started with our Q&A today, I just want to give you guys a bit of an announcement that I forgot to put in our 5,000 subscribers video. So a lot of people were asking me yesterday and today, where's the video? Because usually we've been releasing on an every other day schedule. Now, I just want to make something perfectly clear. That type of schedule is incredibly hard to maintain, and while the current health situation has led us to try to really boost our speed, now that we're kind of getting back into the groove of somewhat regular life here in British Columbia, our pace of uploads can't stay that high. And so what I'm trying to commit to is an upload every 3 days. And the plan is to try to get a significant backlog of videos produced such that we never have to stray from that upload every third day. So we'll be sacrificing a bit in terms of frequency of uploads, but hopefully for like the next year at least, it should be consistently every third day. So I just wanted to put that out there. On to the main topic of today's video. We have 25 questions today, so absolutely fantastic response. Thank you so much for asking questions. As always, there will be a link down below to ask questions for next month's video. If you're not already, consider following us on Twitter and Instagram. We're getting close to some milestones, especially for Twitter. I'd like to get up to 500 followers, so if you guys could go smash that follow button on Twitter, I'd love it. And if you are really passionate about the channel and you want to get on the Metro map, then consider supporting us on Patreon. We'd really appreciate it. Last thing, before we get started, I have to shout out our two newest patrons, Sam and Isaac. I'm sorry for pronouncing your name wrong, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. It means a lot to Ellen and I. Now, let's get started. So what services and amenities would you like to see at the Pearson Transit Center? So I'd love to see some retail, some restaurants, different variety. You know, you could have a few sit-down restaurants, a lot of faster restaurants, kind of what's called fast casual, kind of the new popular trend in restaurants. I'd love to see some of that. Again, some retail, ideally kind of some larger stores that have a variety of products. Like, I love how in some airports there's often like a large electronics store, a large clothing store, that sort of thing. So I'd like to see that type of thing. Also, it would be great to see some hotels right at the transit center, maybe one or two. I think that would be fantastic. Maybe a mix of price ranges. So I think those are some of the amenities I think about. But then also some other things that could be really valuable. A lot of bike storage, showers like available to people so that they can rent a shower out, take a shower. If you've just got off a flight, if you've got off a long distance train and you're getting onto a flight, taking a shower is nice midway through some travel sometimes. As well as perhaps some like nap pods, that sort of thing. So if people don't want to rent out a hotel room, they can just like take a couple hour nap easily. I think some of these sort of amenities would be fantastic, and yeah, that's what I'd say for that question. Next up, you knew this question was coming. What concert did you go to in Sydney? So in Sydney, I went to see Jay-Z and U2. Yes, I know not necessarily the most youthful artists, well, Jay-Z more so than U2, but both artists I enjoy, I won't lie. What do you think is a good size for a city to have an LRT and a good size for rapid transit? Well, I think LRT is rapid transit, just to answer that first kind of bit there. Also, what do you think is better for a rapid transit system, to be above ground or underground? Well, that really depends. If you're at grade, well, obviously that's not as good as fully grade separated, but that being said, if you're the size of Kitchener-Waterloo or some other smaller cities around the world that are starting to get LRT systems, I think around 500,000 is definitely reasonable, especially if you're going at grade. And I think full rapid transit by 1 million for sure would be reasonable, and so I think that's my rough answer. I say that surface level LRT isn't as good, but again, transit is very dependent on the urban form. So if you have a city that's super dense, well then maybe having a little bit of a slower mode of travel, like an at-grade tramway or LRT, not as big of a deal because you can get to most of the places you want to go really quickly that way. Big sprawling city, you might want higher speeds and grade separation. Some thoughts. Next up, do you need permission from various transit authorities to take live footage, video, or still pictures? That really depends. You should check on the transit system's website. Usually they'll say what their policy is. I think generally the policy I go by is if you're not disrupting service, if you're being obviously not a nuisance, then it's fine. It's just like anywhere typically in public. That being said, if you're bothering someone or someone tells you to leave and you don't know the policy, well then you should leave. If you do know the policy and you're in certain systems where it's definitely allowed, then do what many people I know do and carry a copy of the policy on your phone or in your wallet, I guess, if people do that. But that way, if someone kind of harasses you, you can just pull it out and say, here's what it says on your website. That's all it needs to come to. Next up, how can transit and suburban regions of Canada evolve to better suit one another? I.e., can streetcars operate in suburbs like Orleans in Canada, in Ottawa, etc.? Well, I think that ideally we have more density. Density generally just serves transit well, and transit can serve density well. That being said, I don't think streetcars are necessarily what you want to serve long distances. Like if you're going out to Canada, that's really far from the core of Ottawa, plus the O train's already going there, so streetcars to there don't make sense. I actually think, as I mentioned in my video here about streetcars and buses, that streetcars are actually best in super dense areas where you can get to most of the destinations you'd want to in a short ride, and so streetcars can be pretty competitive with other modes of transit. Downtown Toronto, where most of the streetcar routes in Toronto operate, is a good example of that. The next question is, how would Go Electrification tie in with Go RER? Could we discuss a little further how Go Electrification will help RER? Metrolinx mentioned using fuel cells. So first thing, fuel cells, not really a thing. I don't know why people are still kind of perpetuating that rumor. I guess there's not a lot of clarity from the agency itself. The official word is that it's up to the bidders who are bidding on the project. And what I can tell you is that they're not going to bid using fuel cells because fuel cells are not well enough tested on a system of this scale that we're building for them to make sense. There's a lot of extra infrastructure that would be involved, and yes, there are potentially some benefits in different places, but on the whole, it's just a lot safer to go with traditional electrification, and these consortiums who are bidding are incredibly risk averse, as they probably should be, and so they're not going with the newest, latest, and greatest tech. They're going with something that's proven, and so catenary should be the way to go. I'm very confident that no one would ever bid with hydrogen fuel cells. How does electrification tie into RER? They're really one and the same, to be honest. RER is the expansion of frequencies, which to a degree has already started to happen, but the true 15 minutes all-day service widely across the network is something that will likely kind of come at the same time as electrification, and so they're really one and the same in my personal opinion. Do you think the Pearson Transit Hub should be similar to other airport transit centers like Paris and Frankfurt? Sure, those airport transit centers have lots of positives to them, but another important thing I think that people forget is that we are in a certain place. You cannot base what you want to build in one city just off another city, because Toronto is not Paris and Toronto is not Frankfurt. Toronto's a lot more car-oriented. Toronto has a lot less extensive of a rail network. We don't have high-speed rail running to the airport, etc., etc. And so we have to shape the transit center around the way it's going to be serving the community in the near future, not in what's it going to be in, 2300 or some crazy year that's way off in the future. We need to think about what Toronto's like today, not what Toronto's going to be like in the far future. And for example, one way we could do that is by including a much larger bus terminal than maybe some of these other airports would have, because buses are going to be more important because, again, Toronto has less rail coverage. Now, the next question is about Melbourne and the city loop and the metro tunnel. Not going to talk about this because we have a video coming on it very shortly, and it would spoil my opinions in the video. So I'm not going to talk about Melbourne, but stay tuned, the video is coming. The next question is kind of a mixture of question and opinion piece. So the question is something along the lines of, I think, can Philadelphia and SEPTA kind of become better, and can, with some smart policy changes, can they improve to be more like some of the better systems in the world? Yes, I think so. I think SEPTA and Philadelphia are really in a great place. They have lots of infrastructure laid out. They need to just buy new, better trains, reactivate a lot of infrastructure, and they can serve the region really well because the network is pretty fantastic. Next up, the question is just South Surrey. Yes, I live in South Surrey. How do you even survive without a car there? Surrey is understandable, but not South Surrey. Well, the reality is that depending on where you live, often there are stores and services that you may want to use nearby to you. And I think that when you're living in the suburbs, that's typically how you should approach where you decide to live. This is not really any different from when I was in Toronto, where the vast majority of my trips were to places nearby because I live near grocery store, restaurants, coffee shop, movie theater, etc. So by living close to where you need to go, you really don't need to take those longer commutes where a car might be tempting most of the time. And that being said too, actually for me, self-storage is fine. I think that your location and your commute pattern are very interdependent. And so some people, based on how they commute, should live in different places. And because I don't travel to downtown Vancouver very often, at least right now, self-storage is fine. If that changes in the future, I might need to reconsider where I live. Currently though, I'm perfectly happy with our local bus service. There's actually some nice buses that can get me to downtown Vancouver pretty conveniently, and so no, I'm pretty satisfied. I live in a walkable and cycling friendly area, and so yeah, it's good down here. Next up, what's your favorite Presto card design? My favorite Presto card design, and I don't have it, is the Up Express Presto card. If you have the Up Express Presto card, or the Canada 150 Compass card, and you're willing to send it to me, I would be hugely grateful. Shoutouts would be in order. I'd read whatever you sent me to the entire channel. Please send me those transit cards. I'd really appreciate them. Next up is favorite Canadian transit agency outside of TransLink, TTC Go, and STM. Well, that pretty much cuts down a lot of the interesting ones. I'd have to say that prior to the mess that is the current O-Train rollout, OC Transpo, obviously, they have a great rail system, and in my opinion, the next best rail system after the big three that you mentioned. Next up is favorite US transit system. New York, is there a question? I mean, it could be so much better, but it's world class even in a terrible state, and that tells you a lot about New York's system. Next is least favorite major US transit system. I'd have to say probably Sound Transit. As much as it should be improving, I think that a lot of mistakes were made, especially with the initial link line, and unfortunately, I think that that's going to be a cost that has to be borne for a long time, especially the at-grade section, which is really strange because it's kind of like the only major at-grade section on the entire current link corridor, and it's going to basically kneecap expansion of that service for a long time, unless it's grade separated, which hopefully it is eventually. Next up, since you've been making a lot more long-form talking videos recently, would you ever consider starting a podcast? Probably not, because I like to focus my energy into kind of the mainstream of YouTube right now. I think with podcasts, it's a lot less edited, and it's harder to get your point across. It's harder to stay directed. I like the shorter formats. Often I don't talk for more than, I would say usually in long form videos, the longest I talk is about 25 minutes, which I think is a little too short for a podcast. So that being said, if you want to watch my videos like that, feel free. Just open me in another tab or on YouTube and just shut down your app and then go about your business and just listen. A lot of the videos should be fine that way. Next up, what do you think of the Hyperloop proposed from Toronto to Montreal? I'm going to stop you right there. The Hyperloop is, there's a lot of thoughts I have about it. It's not a real technology though. There's no operational Hyperloop in the world. There are some test tracks that are very, very beta. It's not high-speed rail. It's not a real technology right now. And people who are proposing it as a real solution, I think are generally just trying to derail actual progress on long-distance rail. What are your thoughts on the Calgary Green Line and any recent opposition to it? I have my issues with the Calgary Green Line, as I have with any transit project. I think a lot of things could be better, and I don't think that there's anything wrong with trying to make things better. That being said, when there's consultation, etc., and people are asked, what's your opinion on this? Should this be made better? That would be when you should talk about why you don't like it and what you think could be better, not when the project is about to be approved and now you're just trying to derail it, which I think is pretty clearly what certain groups are trying to do with this project, not because they don't like it because of some detail, but because they aren't really pro-transit in the first place. So those are my thoughts. There are things that could be better with the project, as with all projects. Next up is a longer question that I'm going to summarize like this. A lot of people want me to make a lot of Australia videos, and I probably don't have time to make them all, at least not right now. So what are your general thoughts? Well, my general thoughts are that the systems in general in Australia, a lot of them are really cool and really awesome. That being said, I think the suburban focus of pretty much all the major transit systems hurts the ridership overall. I think the focus for transit is something Canada has got right, and I think we've done better than Australia in some aspects, is that we've really focused on putting transit in the dense corridors first, not as much retrofitting older lines out to the suburbs to nicer standards. And so what that's led to is our networks don't go far out into the suburbs, but what you see is they still have a ton of ridership, a lot more per capita than the Australian systems in general, because where they are placed, there's a ton of ridership and we feed them with really good bus service, etc. We have less of a focus on car parks everywhere, and so I think that Canada gets the divide of density and the focus of transit in the densest areas of cities right. And then now what you're seeing in the bigger cities is we're starting to expand out now that we've focused on the core for a long time. We're starting to, while we continue to focus on the core, we're starting to expand out into the suburbs to pull them in with good new rail networks like GO RER and the REM in Montreal. The next question is BC Ferries. They exist, yes. I'm not sure what the question here is. I think BC Ferries is cool. I might do videos about them someday. They're not my #1 priority because I'm just not a boat person, but I can appreciate the value of BC Ferries. And BC Ferries, I believe, is like the 2nd largest ferry line in the world, and so pretty cool to live in the province and the country where that exists. So those are my thoughts. Next up, can you name all the streetcar routes? The Downtowner, Kingston, okay, well, some of these may not be operating, some may be Downtowner, Kingston Road, Queen, King, Dundas College. There was Cherry for a while there. You have Spadina, you have Bathurst, you have Waterfront, you have St. Clair, Long Branch, which is kind of operated as a separate service of the 501. Trying to think if there's any I'm forgetting. The college, good. I said St. Clair. I think that's all of them. I don't think I missed any. If I did, I'm sure you guys will let me know. I got Bathurst, right? Okay. What were your briefly mentioned criticisms of Montreal's REM? Again, I like the project overall. My criticisms are probably that you could have cut the platforms longer on the Deux-Montagnes section, and that would have let you have longer trains on that section alone. Maybe a good thing for the long term. I don't think it's an issue to expand them in the future. That's a criticism I have. Another criticism I would say is not connecting to Dorval. That would be a pretty obvious thing to do and shouldn't have cost too much more, so they probably should have done that. I don't love the entire governance structure. I think it could probably be tweaked and improved. I would like more information about like how bus operations are going to change, etc. But I think that's kind of a more regional thing, and it would be good to know. It would be good to see maybe a bit more collaboration from the STM and the REM project to kind of say like, oh, here's how we're going to reroute services, here's how we're going to integrate stuff. I think that would be good. But other than that, I'm pretty satisfied. Do you think TTC should implement bus lanes and priority on all corridors, especially Finch East with a lot of buses every hour? Yes, in certain places they definitely should. That being said, there's not a need for it on all routes. For example, I used to use the bus on Cummer Avenue a lot, and it was fine. It ran pretty fast almost all day long. It would have benefited from bus lanes on Yonge, where a lot of buses are traveling right now. But I think long term, when there's a station at Cummer, it will be fantastic. And it's only a 2-lane road, so if there were bus lanes, I guess that would mean just ban cars from the street. And I don't know how you're going to achieve that in Toronto right now. But yes, in key corridors, it's a really common sense move to make, and it's shocking that we haven't. That's my thoughts on that. I live in Florida, but one of the most exciting areas in the US is the light rail expansion in Dallas. Could you give us your thoughts? I think it is great to see Dallas expanding its light rail. In particular, I really like Tex Rail and I believe it's going to be called the Cotton Belt line or the Silver line. It's great to see those lines in particular because I think they can serve kind of auto-oriented suburbia quite well because they travel fast, they have a little lower frequency, but they can do a bit better in car-oriented areas, and they can kind of reach farther from the kind of core of the city. With that in mind, it is good to see the Dallas system expand as a whole, but I'm not sure that light rail is always, again, the best option for these long distance corridors. I think something kind of like the Tex Rail, but just electrified, could make more sense. Perhaps you have to tunnel it in a few dense areas, but then you can run it in rail right-of-ways and perhaps highway medians, etc. when you leave the core areas of the city, and that would probably serve a really sprawly city like Dallas better. But again, it's great to see any transit expansion, and I can't complain too much. Also, if you're interested in Dallas, as I said, I'm also interested, and so it's another city where we kind of have ideas earmarked for future videos. When the whole travel situation gets back to normal, it's one of the cities in the US that I would like to visit to go check out the system. So yeah. Next is, what is the most disappointing transit system you've ridden on and why? And that's the final question. I'd say the system I was most disappointed by was the Link in Seattle. I think Seattle, for a city of its size, deserves so much more than the current Link service, and I think that even with the expansions that are planned, you know, it's kind of too little too late. The system is not that great in terms of design right now, and I think, strangely, it's kind of like the Eglinton Crosstown, but worse because the underground portions don't have ATC, as far as I know. So it's really just not a great setup. Hopefully things can be improved over time, but again, it kind of shows the importance of really long-term thinking when you're designing a system, because especially with a core route like Seattle's has become, if you don't build that first line really well, well then now every line that uses those sections is kind of limited by what you did when you built that first line. And so I think that's the lesson you have to learn from Seattle. So those are all the questions for today. I hope you guys are happy with my answers, or at least you could learn something about my opinion on these different projects. Thanks so much for watching. If you have a question for next month, please leave it down in the comments below. And thank you for watching. Have a nice night.